So I wanted to just post a quick video. This is in a substitution of what I really should have done in meeting with the group for my data culture discussion for EDLE 6329. So there are two articles that the group were to read and discuss. The first one was by Dr. Anthony Mohammed. He wrote an article called Do We Believe They Can Learn? Now, I had the opportunity to not only read the article, but I had actually gone to PSCs at Work, their conference in Charlotte, North Carolina, with a cadre of student administrators. I was then department chair for English, department chair for science, and then one other teacher for English language arts. We went to the PCL schools, school, PLCs at Work conference. That's the company that he now works for through the DeFores. That was started by Richard and I forgot his wife's name, Rebecca DeFore. So everything that I read in the article was great, and it was really in alignment with what he said as a keynote speaker there. And he actually had, I think, one or two breakout sessions that I attended as well. I'm a very big believer in PLCs because of the work I've done in schools when we've really had the opportunity to have collaborative communities. Sometimes some schools don't really give you a schedule that allows for that. And I've really tried to take advantage of that as much as I could when I was as a classroom teacher. And really, as I've come now to my school now, Lakeside High School, really advocated for that to happen a little bit more effectively than it was when I was first started working at Lakeside. Our principal, Dr. Susan Stoddard, came from Cobb County, and I believe that her school there had already contracted with PSC at Work. And so she was already familiar with the work of that organization and how we can be making PLCs a more effective way to look at data and to look at student progress and growth, to not be able to ignore those students that can sometimes slip through the cracks when you don't know exactly which students are not learning. Those four essential questions, or those fundamental questions he had there, Dr. Stoddard had us put those in our unit plans, I would say starting her first year, I guess that was in 2020. The year 2020-21, we started putting that as a unit planner document we had to answer every time we met as PLCs. And that was very challenging because our school had never asked for anything like that out of those meetings. We would just sort of do these kind of rudimentary tasks when we would have like a monthly PLC meeting. But she said she wanted weekly ones. And people were like, what are we going to talk about every week? But so that became kind of the framework to at least start a discussion. And then 2 years ago, we started pushing for common formative sessions. I say we, but in my role as department chair at that time, and then I transitioned later to becoming an academic coach at the school. I would participate in as many of those PLC meetings as possible to try to help move that process forward using some of that information I got from the conference. And try and remember some of these great quotes. I wish I'd had this article because I think it's so concise a way to re-deliver some of those great points from the conference of, the power of using data is so that you can really truly diagnose in the same way that a doctor does. You can really see what's working, what's not working, what needs to be addressed that maybe you're not addressing, what needs to be remediated, what needs to be accelerated because it's already working. Some kids already have a lot of sometimes capabilities, and you don't need to keep reteaching something because they've got it. So I think it's a very powerful article to kind of, I would say, condense so many of the things that he talks about in his much longer keynote addresses. He also was a keynote speaker for our summer leadership conference for DeKalb County Public Schools. So I believe, I don't know this for sure, but I believe that we are contracting as a county to work with PLCs at Work to come to offer us assistance because PLCs are working sporadically around our county, but to make it consistent so that everyone's doing it in the correct way and using that data and having those database conversations, I think is going to be very powerful. So we moved from having a monthly expectation of common formative assessments to now, this past year we had, actually it was once a unit the first year. Second year was once a month that everyone, even if you're a singleton, you should have a formative assessment that goes in, that can be monitored by your administrator. This year I hear that we're going to be moving even further, so we'll have common formatives happening every month, but also common summatives that will happen every 9 weeks. So I really believe in what he's talking about. I've seen the difference it makes when you really look at data and you don't go by your assumptions based on gender, class, socioeconomic standing, because I've had gifted students who can barely write and who haven't read a book in years. And I've had ESOL kids who go on to go to governor's honors. But it's because I really looked at that data of what they can really achieve, and not just going on my assumptions based on sometimes an arbitrary barrier, something they didn't even create. So that's the first article. The second one is, interestingly enough, also something we've been working on a lot at my school as well. And so the second article, what's that title of this one? See it on my screen there. Was called The Case Against Zero. So we've been talking a lot about grading for equity, and we actually have this book. I had it on my desk here a second ago. But it's called Grading for Equity, which has been a book that we were actually reading in our school leadership team. And so we've been looking at this idea about what does it mean to grade, how we really should be looking at grading in terms of retaking, remediating. And I think that what this article, again, is such a great condensation of a lot of things that I think a lot of our teachers that are sometimes challenging this idea of looking at grading in a different way, I think this article will really help us a lot to further that discussion, because it breaks it down to just the basic numerical values, right? That idea that if I have failed or I missed an assignment, that it's so many points away from passing. If I failed or if I didn't turn something in, a 0 is so far below a D. Now, a D doesn't mean that you've mastered the standards, right? That's minimal. Minimal progress towards the standards if I get a D on something. So if I've gotten an F, to say an F is everything below that is really shocking. It's like when there's a 10-point differential for all those other grades, and then all of a sudden it's a 6, sometimes a 50, sometimes a 60-point width. Ours is actually, because our D is 70 in DeKalb County. Only 70 gets a D. So ours is 0 to 69 is a fail. So that's a lot of points that are going out the window. And how do you actually balance the grade book? If I've missed one assignment, sometimes I'm moving my whole grade in that class down a grade level. And when you think about how that can impact a student's self-esteem, their ability to pass a class or several classes, if that happens, it's kind of shocking. And it's something that teachers don't really like to think about, because as I put in my response there, in my summary and reflection, I have this feeling that many teachers try to teach in the way they were taught. They try to give back in the way that they were given. And so since they were taught in this traditional way of that 0 to 100 grading scale, to think about anything different than that just sounds so challenging, so foreign, and almost seems like you're attacking the whole methodology of how they believe education should run. That kids need to be just it's almost, I feel like, the way you hear about hazing in college campuses, hazing in sports teams and bands and in fraternities and sororities. Like, people will say, like, oh, that's the way we've always done it, so we're going to continue doing it. It's nothing about there really being an ethical or a rational reason for why we're still proceeding in this way. There's nothing this is really doing to help the individual, but it's the way it's always been done. So they use this historical notion of tradition as the justification for why we should continue the practice. I liked, and I put this in my response, this idea that perhaps you just use that 4-point scale like you do in grading for a transcript. And you can use those decimals. So there is a certain value that's given, but you don't have this overwhelming gulf between a kid who has missed an assignment or has not made the standards, acceptable progress for the standards in assignment, to somebody who has minimal progress. Not even mastery, just minimal progress. To have such a wide gulf does not really make sense, and I don't think it really is equitable. So that's something we are still having conversations about. I'm not sure what we're going to do for this next school year. I think we're going to come up with an exact plan for remediation and makeup that we can all live by before we start for the new school year. But anyway, that's my thoughts about the implications of both the articles. They're both things that are very contemporary to the work I'm doing right now at my school. We've been working on kind of both these ideas for the last few years, and they're hard because I think they push back against sometimes the way people have historically been working. So they require a lot of training, support. They need accountability steps. They may need people that can come in as outside facilitators and trainers, short articles like this, because it's hard to tell a teacher you have to read a whole book like Reading for Equity. It was hard for our whole leadership team to read that whole book. But you can say, here's a short article, and let's have some responses. Let's have some takeaways from that article. What can we do to shift our culture and our community to support our students in a different way? In a different way. So they are encouraged to stay in the fight and to go on to pass and go on to get their high school diplomas and maybe go on to a 4-year college of their choice. All right, but that's all I have to say for this video. I appreciate your time.